Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Brian and Jim here with DrinkABeerandPlayAGame, and today we're checking out WWF Royal Rumble for the Super NES and the Sega Genesis. This was, of course, the follow-up to WWF Super WrestleMania. Let's get into it.
Released in 1993, this was developed by Sculptured Software and was published under LJN for the Super NES and Flying Edge for the Genesis. These were both basically distributed by Acclaim. Like we said, it's to follow up to Super WrestleMania. They greatly expanded in probably almost every way from the original title. So, let's get into it and see what differences we have between the two, because actually there's an okay amount.
Starting off with the graphics, before I show you the comparison between the Sega Genesis and the Super NES, let's just first take a look at the original game versus this. Now, as you can tell, they clearly expanded and made the game look a hell of a lot better. Now, let's do the actual comparison. Obviously, like a lot of games at a time, there's not a huge difference. With the Super NES, you get a little bit smoother animations and a little bit smoother looking sprites. But overall, they're both pretty decent looking packages. The things we really appreciated was just how active the crowd was, the announcers, the fact that you had a ref, and all the sprites have a lot of detail. Now, one of the biggest faults we give this game is they didn't friggin' proportion these wrestlers right at all. How the hell is Yokozuna the same exact size as Shawn Michaels? That's goddamn ridiculous. Other than that, the ring looks good. When you go outside, you can pick up weapons. All the animations for all the wrestlers are actually really smooth. The run animation, the finishers. There's really not a lot to hate about this game, especially when it comes to the graphics. When it comes to scores, we both gave it a 7. It's clearly above average, especially for wrestling games at the time. This was one of the best looking ones out there. And when it comes to beer, I'm going to give it 2. 1 for applauding the game on its animation, and 1 for fucking up the proportion so badly.
Alright, the sound. Definitely a decent package and much improved from the first one. One thing that really impressed us off the bat was just how they expanded on the general sound effects. The crowd sounds a lot more alive, going with lows and highs as far as the action goes. There's actually more grunts between the wrestlers too, even though they all sound, well, basically the same. In the menu screens and when you're selecting your character, you have the generic WWF music, which is fine, sounds good, even though the Super NES is, as you would expect, is slightly better. But you don't get to hear the music until you win a match for each wrestler, which is kind of disappointing and a little bit of a sour spot for me. Besides that, though, it's definitely an improved package. Brian gave it a 6, and I gave it a 5. Brian was probably a little bit more impressed by the general increase in the sound effects than I was. And maybe I'm still butthurt about the lack of wrestler theme songs. But besides that, it's definitely a worthwhile package, and it does not take away from the game at all. As far as beer goes, I'll add one happy beer for the greatly increased sound effects.
The control. The area where Jim and I differ the most, and I think it's just on Jim's interpretation of control, especially since we've established the rules of this goddamn site.
Your rules are bullshit.
You agreed to them.
Never.
They're on the main page.
I was drunk.
That's no excuse.
You took advantage.
That's how you came into this world.
Wow. Alright. Just go.
So anyone that's familiar with this game...
Fucked up.
So anyone that's familiar with this game or WWF Super WrestleMania or WWF Raw knows that when I say the word tug of war system, you know exactly what we mean. The game is fairly simple in the sense that you have your strikes, you have a run button, and then you have the grapple button, which initiates this goddamn annoying ass tug of war, which just means you bash the buttons as hard as you can, basically breaking your thumbs or the controller in the process. I really wish I would have recorded Jim and I in our footage of recording this. We did the atypical when you somehow feel like if you raise the controller above your head and press it harder, it's going to help you. It's so ridiculous. The tug of wars can go on so long, and you really just end up giving up to whoever's going to keep pressing more and more. That, to me, is an absolute bullshit control scheme that's going to force you to just button mash in the absolute worst way. It's nothing to do with skill. It's nothing to do with input. It's all to do with who's just going to press the buttons the fastest. Putting that aside, the controls actually do work fairly well when you're not in the tug of war, such as the running, the hitting. but that goddamn tug-of-war just ruins this game for me. Hence, the control being bad. So, as you see from our scores, I gave it a 4, and Jim gave it a 6. When it comes to beer, I'm just going to give it 1 for Jim fucking up again.
Hey. The control scheme may not be the best, but for what it went for, I think it did a fine job.
Jim fucked up.
Nah. The gameplay. So, like most of these sequel wrestling games that we're talking about, this game improved over the original in a lot of ways. For one, the movement and just the animations overall are just better and slightly less choppy. You get little things here and there, like the ability to get back into the ring by going in through the front instead of just to left or right, like in Super WrestleMania. You get a few more game modes. You get one-on-one, tag team, 3-man tag, and Royal Rumble modes, and different variations of each. You get the ability to, knock out the ref so you can do some illegal moves. You get to fight on the outside with weapons, which are added. There's just a lot of cool little touches that the game put in there. Where I don't like it, though, is the fact that as far as a wrestling game goes, it's still the same as it basically was in Super WrestleMania. And at its core, there wasn't much of an improvement there to make me really be impressed. And I honestly am not crazy about this whole generation of wrestling games to begin with. Super WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, Raw, they all basically play the same way. It's just not... I don't know if I was expecting a deeper experience, but to me it was just never fun overall. One of the last things I want to touch on is the rosters for the game. While the wrestlers don't exactly play differently from each other, it is cool to have some of your favorites, and it might sway which way you're going to go with the game. So in each one, you share a couple similar ones like Randy Savage, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Crush, The Narcissist, as Bobby Heenan would say, Shawn Michaels, and Razor Ramon, but then you get some exclusives like where on the Genesis you get Hulk Hogan, the Super NES you get Tatanka, or where on the Genesis you get Papa Shango, on the Super NES you get Ric Flair. And some also exclusives for the Genesis are Rick the Model Martel, Jim Duggan, and IRS, whereas the Super NES you get Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna, and Mr. Perfect. So honestly, it's almost a coin flip for which roster you like better. I think it's a cool touch, though it does kind of suck that you have to buy both versions of the game to basically be able to play with everyone. All that being said, Brian gave it a 5 and I gave it a 4. And when it comes to beers, I'll add 2 beers. 1 for having such drastically different rosters, and 2 for just not being enough of an increase in gameplay overall.
Hey Jim!
What?
I know why you really gave it a 4.
Why would that be, Brian?
Jim, why don't you watch this clip right here?
Wait, what clip?
Jim's Yokozuna.
No.
Watch. We're in the Royal Rumble. Watch what he does.
No.
Boom.
Ah!
And who goes on to win? The People's Champion. When it comes to originality, obviously WWF Super WrestleMania established a lot of the rules, but as we mentioned before, this game improved. For one, that annoying ass tug of war, at least this time you have the actual meter, so that helped a lot. Plus, they added the Royal Rumble, which was a huge deal at the time to see that many wrestlers in the ring fighting each other. And finally, one of the bigger things we saw, this is really one of the first games we can remember where you can actually use a weapon. It was cool as shit, and it was something that always stuck with us. While this game may not have reinvented the wheel, it definitely offered enough to differ itself from the original title, so we felt it deserved a 5. And when it comes to beer, I'm not even going to add 1. I mean, this game just was meant to be a sequel, ended up surpassing the original by far.
Alright, the replayability. Well, you have the greatly expanded rosters, you have the inclusion of the Royal Rumble mode, you have all the different little subsets of each of the 4 main modes, and overall, it just seems like a little bit more of a package that you would come back to again and again. While I do think Raw is probably the best out of these 3, this is definitely a solid package, and if you like this style of game, you have a lot to come back to. So, Bri gave it a 6, and I gave it a 7. And when it comes to beer, I'll add 1 beer for all the different game modes.
So overall, this is a game I grew up with and loved as a kid. And now playing it today, I recognize it didn't really age that well. It might not be perfect, but there's plenty of fun to be had. The thing that still kills it for me to this day is that goddamn tug-of-war and terrible control. I don't like that style. Yes, it makes the games much more frantic and can be a semi-fun experience with your friend, but then it just gets tiresome and somebody's bound to just not have fun anymore. So when it comes to scores, we both gave it a 5. When we round all of our scores together, it rounds out to a 5.5. And really, just for the presentation alone and the fact that you have as much replayability as you do, I think it deserves that little bit notch above average. Like Jim said, one of the most unfortunate things about this game is whether you choose Super NES or Sega is probably going to come down to which roster you prefer. Even though the Super NES is technically better from a graphics and a sound standpoint, if you really want Hulk over Tatanka or you really want Papa Shango over Ted DiBiase, the choice is really going to come down to that. So either game you can't go wrong if you really like it, but as I've said before, don't spend too much. So when it comes to beer pairing, I'm going to go with the Sly Fox Royal Weiss. Yes, I'm not going to lie, the title Royal really helped inspire me, but this is a fun little beer, and if you're playing with your buddies and you're just mashing away, you're going to need something to take away the pain. But remember to drink your beers and play your games responsibly. As always, guys, thanks for checking out this video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you give us a thumbs up, leave some comments, or better yet, why not subscribe? Till next time, guys, cheers.